And it's a very good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel. Three of the panel out and about. Paul Dalligan out in the city, Cooter out in Ringwood somewhere. Dan Butley's at the beach volleyball and can't make it today. And Sarah, you and I are destined to be doing it from our homes.
Yes, apparently not as social as everyone else on the panel.
Oh, okay.
Well, I've got the sports hat on today. I'm off to the Bombers with my brother-in-law down from Sydney. So on Ponyfish Island, listeners, as we speak. So this is Melbourne for you. You could do a lot worse than this fine venue. There's no venue like this in Sydney, I can tell you, right on the Harbour Bridge pylon. So it's a good little spot.
It'd be hard to have a pylon in the middle of the harbour, Paul.
Hard to have a
pylon in the middle of the harbour, mate.
Yeah, it would be.
Wasn't
Paul Hogan? I think Paul Hogan was part of the building the Harbour Bridge, but never put a bar in, unfortunately. Hoax.
Wasn't it Schweppes? It was Schweppes, wasn't it? Schweppes was involved, wasn't it, somehow?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We're not far from Crown, but we won't mention that.
No. I was just thinking, Paul, you should be signing up a sponsor while you're there, given the free airtime they're being given on Sportsfan.
Well, I was going to say Jamie Packer's going about as well as your dogs, Professor, but we'll get to that a bit later on.
All right. Well, look, that's a good place to start. Well, why don't we start with round 8 NRL and the lead game Thursday night, a long time ago now, but the Rabbitohs overcame the Raiders, and Ricky Stuart getting less and less hair. He's pulling plenty out to try and work out what's gone wrong with these Raiders this season.
Well, poor old Ricky Stuart, he doesn't have to worry about the referees anymore. He's got players' wives having a crack at him now. He's got poor old Joe Tapine's wife, who's not happy that her man's not getting enough time on the workbench, on the field. So she's got onto Instagram and had a crack at Ricky Stuart. So he's got them coming from everywhere about the way that he's managing his team. And I don't blame Mrs. Tapine for her views, because the way he's managing that team, who knows? But they've got more men down than Saving Private Ryan. So they do have a lot of issues there. They actually lost their halfback, George Williams, in the warm-up. Now, I've been enjoying the commentary of Shane Flanagan, ex-coach. He said he's never once heard or seen someone losing their halfback in the warm-up. So quite unfortunate for the Raiders. They do have a lot of injuries. I tipped them to go very well this year, but Rabbitohs were just way too good this year, way too good. And it was just too tough for the Raiders to hold on with all their troops down. Ricky Stuart's head exploded almost with the 6-1 penalty count against. 8-1 penalty count against. But the Rabbitohs, even without Latrell Mitchell, just on fire.
Paul, was that the first tackle Benji Marshall's made this year?
Oh, don't you get started on Benji. He's that good value, Cooter. You missed this last week. He should be in an Audi catalogue. He's on $150,000 a year, and that's possibly the best signing I've seen in my rugby league following career, which is 40 years. He's an absolute superstar, Benji, and he could be the X factor, which will bring the Rabbitohs a premiership. So no one touches Benji on my watch, Scooter. Sorry.
No, I'll just.
Sounds like you're saying he doesn't touch anyone else.
No, I just thought that the penalty that he managed to milk, or they call it milking, don't they? He played that very well.
He did very well, and he probably hadn't heard the Academy Awards had closed. I think that he was about to get Best Actor in an NRL game to milk a penalty if that ever comes up on stage. But that was quite an effort from Benji Marshall. He's been around forever. He didn't come down in the last shower. So he certainly played it well, and he got the advantage. And that's sportsmanship. We'd put that down as pure and simple.
So Paul,
sorry, go, Professor.
I was just to say, Paul, Adam Reynolds' thumb ligament injury, reports that he'll be out for at least 6 weeks. How's that going to affect, A, his contract negotiations, and B, the Rabbitohs just generally?
Well, I've got to tell you about Adam Reynolds. I haven't seen a man more wanted since Tony Mockbell had that rug on his scone, because there are people wanting him from every corner. He's got the head of the Broncos flying down today as we speak to meet with him. There's rumours he's already signed with the Sharks. And it's all happening for Adam Reynolds. Rabbitohs are not budging from their 1-year deal. And the reason is this, Professor Bombshell on air. And don't tell Schooner, because he might have a heart attack. We might be getting Cherry Evans. So that's a big rumour doing the rounds, is the reason that we're clearing the decks is because Cherry Evans love working with Wayne Bennett at the state of origin level. The problem is Wayne Bennett's finishing at the end of the year. So what might happen is the Cherry Evans and Benny show goes to the Broncos. So watch this space. There's a lot happening in the NRL halfback market at the moment.
Well, Schooner would be worried not only from that rumour, but there's also a rumour that Cherry Evans could be heading to Belmore to team up with former coach Trent Barrett.
Well, that's news to me. I haven't heard that one. That the fact you're getting Burton, if you had Burton and Cherry Evans, you'd go from trash, no offence, Professor, to treasure, because that would be an amazing combination.
So Bellamy also rumoured to be signing another year contract with the Storm.
Yes, with a team like this, I don't blame him. They obviously based just down the road. Harry Grant, freakish. The way they dispatched the Sharks was just amazing. I'd want to be a part of this Storm team. I wouldn't want to go away either, because everyone said they were done and dusted when all the top players left. They haven't missed a beat. I used to love living in Richmond. They'd set off a firecracker after every try. You'd think you're in Chinatown on New Year's Eve some nights, because they must have run out of firecrackers in the budget, because they're just on fire, the Storm. I don't blame Bellamy for not wanting to leave either. And why you'd want to go to the Broncos at the moment is beyond me. They did have a win, though. We'll talk about, Professor.
With the Storm, and you mentioned Harry Grant, him and the Cheese, Brandon Smith, playing in that same team. It's a formidable pack, but it just gets better when those two seem to be playing on the field together.
And even without Pappenhausen there, it's a freakish team. Cameron Munster's kicking wasn't ideal, but they still managed to dispatch the Sharks by plenty. So when Pappenhausen's back, they're going to compete with the Rabbitohs and the Panthers, and I can't see many others, maybe the Eels, in the running. The Roosters, my word, they've had some casualties this year, but they just keep on winning. I've got to talk about that, Professor. Probably the second best winger of all time after Ken Irvine. Brett Morris did an ACL. Looks like his career's over. And there was Josh Morris, forgive me, I can't even tell them apart. Josh Morris, there were some very sad scenes in the dressing room at the Roosters as the identical twin brothers hugged, knowing one of their careers is over. The Roosters, they just keep on winning, though. They beat the Knights, who I thought were going to be good this year, but they can't match up to someone like the Roosters. They are a real credit to the game, the Roosters, and that's the Rabbitohs fans saying that. So many injuries. I mean, they've got their best player, Luke Keary, out. They've got Tedesco.
How many beers have you had, Paul?
What's that?
How many beers have you had to be giving credit to the Roosters?
Oh, no, it's the second beer. The brother-in-law can confirm that. So you'd think I'm on something stronger to give credit to the Roosters, but I'll always put credit where it's due. And it was amazing effort from the Roosters. They just keep on getting it done. But with all those injuries, I can't see them competing with the Storm, the Rabbitohs and the Panthers, unfortunately. But it almost, again, this will shock you, Cuda. As a league fan, I almost wish they had their best team, because it would be some sort of showdown.
And can we talk about the great man that runs rugby league, runs the world, just next to, I think he's just next to Jesus, but talk me through this, what his proposal is for what are these?
Oh, conferences, yeah.
Conferences.
Apparently he's got it down as a 50-50 chance. Now that to me, because he normally has everything he does down as 100% chance. So I don't think it's going to get off the ground. But Peter Verlander is like one of those tanks in Tiananmen Square. So if he's talking 50-50, I don't think he thinks he'll get it up. It's a conference system based on enhancing the local rivalries and having your interstate teams playing against each other. I don't like it. I like the way the game's going. I think that our game is as good as ever. So I don't understand why he'd want to push for it. You've got to sometimes stop innovating just for the sake of it. And I give him credit for not pushing expansion for the sake of it. So I don't think this will get off the ground.
While you're on expansion, Paul, news of a second New Zealand team has upset a whole lot of rugby league people in Western Australia, because they think they're odds on to get a team once again. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd be more inclined to go to New Zealand than a Western Australian team. I mean, they always say about Perth, no one's from Perth, everyone's come from somewhere. But most people there are English, South African, Kiwi. A lot of them are more rugby union fans, I think, in Perth than rugby league fans. I'd be going for a second team in New Zealand if we want to take on the All Blacks and affect their stranglehold on the sport over there. I would be going that way, certainly, rather than a Perth team.
Now, one game we can't not talk about, Paul, is the tri-fest between the Titans and the Broncos. If ever you wanted an example of a momentum swing, if you looked at that game after the first 15 minutes, the Titans were going to win by 100 points. Then the Broncos go on a scoring spree and end up winning the game.
It's the best comeback in the Broncos' history, and they've been around for 30 years. One of my favourite Broncos is Alfie Langer. He's out there in inverted commas as a trainer, but he stops just short of getting a whiteboard out there and a few texters and drawing up the plays on the field. He's that involved in the team. I was worried after the match we're going to see him in his undies again, jumping up on the desk, on the bar table, dancing around.
And the bin,
banging the bin. So again, as a rugby league fanatic, to see the Broncos going well. Kevin Walters, great guy. He's obviously got a good footballer's brain. Forgive the oxymoron, but it's really good to see the Broncos. And it actually showed the Titans up perhaps as the pretenders. And again, linking it back to Cameron Smith, if they're just pretenders, Cameron Smith's not going to get the boots back off the wall. If they're showing that they could actually contend, Cameron Smith could be the missing piece to get them deep into the finals. But they look a bit flaky for mine, the Titans. Well done on the Broncos, though. As I said, the biggest comeback in their history, and back when they were the powerhouse, they've never had a comeback like that. So as a league fan, it was amazing to watch.
Well, you've got to say, Paul, that if the Titans were going to do anything this season, then the Broncos, with where they were at, that's a game they've got to win.
They've got to hold on to that game, and I don't know how much hair the Titans coach has got, but he wouldn't have too much left after that, because that was an absolute decimation after they were on top early. And as you said, they could have won by 1,000. It was just so one-sided. But whatever happened at halftime there, maybe Craig Bellamy's already started giving advice to Kevin Walters on what to say at halftime. But do they finish well, the Broncos? And it was great to see.
The tackle stats from the first half, I think the Titans had 31 missed tackles, and the first two sets that the Broncos had, they've scored from. The Titans were incredibly soft, and that would have been the thing that really upset Holbrook. I would have thought the fact that Brisbane were able to score at will, and considering who they've played and who they've beaten, and Gold Coast are actually inside the 8 before this game. That was the other thing with this, and all of a sudden you go, well, they can't be a contender going forward, and they're just making up the numbers.
Well, last week against my Rabbitohs, Fafita scored 3 tries and haven't seen a more damaging performance since Miley Cyrus on that wrecking ball. And then this week, he does nothing, shoots blanks. So he's a flat track bully, and Tavita Pengai Jr. absolutely outclassed him. If it was a boxing match, you'd have him down as the best forward in the game. So Fafita's on $1.2 million a year, if you don't mind, and he didn't fire a shot. So when the pressure was on in any sport, that's when your top players should stand up and be counted. It's easy to stand up and be counted when you've got players down like 10 pins. He needed to stand up for Fafita, and he didn't do it. And it was a very, very, very strong black mark on his CV.
Paul, he had one run in the first half.
Yeah. He's at 1.2 million a year, one run. I've seen hungover construction workers work harder, so just very ordinary from him. And he's supposed to be, everyone's talking about him, one of the best in the game, most damaging forward ever. Gordon Tallis would have stepped up. Our Gordon Tallis, one of our old favourites, would have stepped up when that game needed him, and he didn't do it for Fafita. So not good at all.
All right, Paul, I've got a text here from Schooner. Even though the Sea Eagles lost, was there anything you saw in that game that could give him some heart for the rest of the season?
What I saw as Des Hasler a few weeks ago was looking pretty despondent, but he's now ripping his head off again, which is a good sign. Even though they lost, it shows how invested he is, that he was so passionate about that outcome. They came very close to a team that could win the comp, so I don't think it was a bad loss, if we call it that, almost as Gelding would call a good second. To lose 28-16 to the team that's favourites to win it all shows they're getting there. And I don't think you should be too disheartened by that loss, Schooner, because it was quite a good performance.
Okay, 2 games for decision today, Paul. The Warriors and the Cowboys at 2:00. Your thoughts on that game?
Well, you've got the battle of Tavasha Sheck, who's just phenomenal in rugby league. He's off to rugby union next year to play for the All Blacks. Up against I Have a Dream, Valentine, Walt Disney Holmes. He's playing well, though. He's earning his money, Valentine, this year for once. They've won 3 in a row, the Cowboys, which you would have given 100-1 on 4 weeks ago. But I think the Warriors in their home base will be too strong when I say home base on the Central Coast. And the other match is the Dragons. And what do we say, Professor? Don't be a nufty. Back Matt Duffy. He's going to score again, I'm sure, today. So he's paying $2 to score a try today. He's well worth the investment for the listeners. The Dragons should run away with that. Michael Maguire has got the dreaded support of the board vote. So we know what that means normally. Is someone's about to be sacked when the board comes out and says he has our full support. You could probably put Nathan Buckley in that mix in the local game.
Oh,
So scores for those wanting to have a gamble on the results, Warriors and Cowboys?
Oh, that could be pretty high scoring, the Warriors. I'd say 26-12, the Warriors.
And the Dragons and Wests?
Dragons, I think 28-10. They're going to run away with that. The Tigers are in all sorts of trouble.
And a $2 bet on Don't Be a Nufty.
Back Matt Duffy, not to score first because he's a fullback. He'll get in there, though. He'll get there. Don't worry about that. Almost a guarantee from the Giraffe. The game I'm looking forward to, though, is the Rabbitohs and the Storm on Thursday night. I'm sure Cooter is as well. That'll be some sort of showdown. We've also got the Eels and Roosters on Friday. So there's a couple of mouth-watering clashes, as Fiorenti would have said, coming up for rugby league fans.
What's your thoughts on the Rabbitohs? And
sorry, Paul. Did you say the Broncos? The Broncos.
Rabbitohs Storm Thursday night. I think it's pretty even. The bookies have them, but the Rabbitohs, the form we're in is just exceptional. But as a sports fan, if you watch that and don't enjoy it, well, go and find something else. Look at the ballet or something, because that's the best we've got.
And did you say Roosters and Eels on Friday night? Eels
and Roosters. I think the Eels should win that given the Roosters' casualties, but the Roosters just have so much tenacity again. I've only had 2 beers, but it's a credit to the Roosters, the tenacity they're showing this year. They really are showing the rugby league spirit, Anzac spirit almost, we'd call.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Sarah, during the week, it was announced that one of the former AFLW players, player Jacinda Barkley, unfortunately died last year. She donated her brain, and it was shown that she had neurological damage, similar to NFL players. So that's a real revelation, given she only played 4 seasons and 23 matches.
Definitely. No, they've found brain damage in the brain of AFLW player Jacinda Barkley, who unfortunately passed away last year. Her family decided to donate her brain and hopefully help with some concussion research. The biggest, I guess, in light of this, the fact that we found damage in her brain, she never had any really big head collisions that were reported. So the fact that she probably hasn't had any really big brain injuries or big impacts to her head previously, but is still seeing damage, is a real concern for the AFL and the AFLW.
Yeah, it certainly brings into account the physical issues in playing the game, perhaps for women. We know that in certain instances, the body of a woman is less suited to twisting and turning injuries. In particular, we've discussed before that the knee functions differently because of the way or the angle of the leg.
Yes, with the ACL.
And makes it more susceptible to ACL injuries. It could be that less impact for a woman is required before there's some marked brain damage.
Potentially, I think this is because the competition is still so fresh. She's really the only AFLW player that we've been able to get an insight into their brain after they've passed away. And we've seen the consequences of repeated head blows in AFL players like Danny Frawley and Shane Tuck. So it's still it's very prevalent, and it's showing that there becomes lots of mental health issues in later life when you're having these kind of head clashes. I think the one thing that we can look at is that this is something that needs to have a bit more research done into it. While obviously we can't have all the the research capabilities, you can't, grab AFLW players' brains and then pop them back in and try work out what's going on. But there's still, I think, a gap between the research in AFLW players and the support to AFL players. With the soft cap in the AFLW especially, they wouldn't have that extra room to build on that research and provide better support to AFLW players. But in light of ACL injuries and the rate of those, and after the incident with Jacinda Barkley and being able to have an insight into the impacts that have happened to her brain, we might need to devote more funds to research in female injuries and broaden this to try and support the competition as it grows.
Coutts, given we've now got this information, it's surely a red flag for the AFL, who need to actually come out and say something about it.
Well, the AFL, they've been surprisingly quiet on this, haven't they? Really haven't heard much about Jacinda Barkley and the release of the report. But also if we talk, and Paul's probably similar with rugby league, is the concussion and policies in place at the moment, is that we're not doing enough. This 12-day is just it sounds like it's just a number that they've come up with, and now people are saying it should be longer. And I'll say the other night, Professor, that I think it was Wade Graham of the Cronulla Sharks. He had a head clash, and 15 minutes later, I think it was 15 minutes later, he actually was taken from the ground and couldn't understand why he was actually taken from the ground. Now, surely a head knock means that you come off, even if it's just a minor head knock, that you come off immediately and it's dealt with accordingly. Like, you look at AFLW, Sarah, and we talk about that, is that the girls previously didn't know how to protect themselves and they would let their head. Now, an issue going forward for all sport that is a collision sport. And we need to be proactive around this. And actually, I think, like Eddie Maguire said, it's a proud day, or whatever his comment. Surely this is an opportunity for the AFL to be leaders and say, right, we're actually going to put something forward here. We're going to do some work in this, and from a concussion perspective, but also from a health perspective. Isn't the onus on the AFL to do something?
Yeah, I would
Definitely think so.
Yeah, I would have thought so, Paul. Sorry, Coutts. Sarah, you mentioned the soft cap. It was highlighted when there was a clash between the AFL matches and the AFLW finals, that some training staff and medical staff were being shared between teams. And of course, then that created a problem because with the clash, the numbers were diverted towards the AFL, it seemed, and the AFLW had to play second fiddle. Given the health concerns raised by this, I would have thought that each AFLW team needs its own specific training and medical staff.
They definitely should. And the fact that I guess we haven't had that already is a bit concerning for AFLW players. And in light of what's happened, especially in the last 12 months with the amount of ACLs, I think it was in round 5, they had something like 3 or 4 girls do their ACL just in the one round. It definitely needs to have funds and staff assigned to it. And there's so many different ways that you can provide support in smaller amounts, even just providing, I guess they would provide programs to these girls. You would hope it's not something that would take a lot of time out of staff. They'd have set up programs for specific athletes and what their aims are. I think just going towards being able to build up programs, especially with knees. We've talked about how Netball Australia has knee programs in place that are supposed to be run through at trainings to protect girls and their knees in netball, something similar for their knees. However, I guess when it comes to the brain, it's so much harder to actually protect. When reading articles about what's happened to Jacinta Barkley, they talked about the NFL and players wearing helmets and how it wasn't doing as much damage as what would happen if they weren't wearing helmets. But they took the analogy and they started speaking about potholes. And they said, if you're running over really big potholes and you run over one or two, you're going to really badly damage your car. That's bad enough. But if you're running over small potholes, like you're wearing a helmet, and you run over 12 or 13 of them, you're still going to do a lot of damage to your car. So even if you're wearing a helmet, you're having that many head collisions, you're still going to really badly impact your body and your brain. I can't see a way that this can really be fixed. If there's ways that it can fix, that's amazing. But if helmets can't fix it, protecting it from the outside, I don't see how we can protect our brain from the inside and still play these high impact sports.
Yeah, you'll recollect when we spoke to the Curtin University student who was studying concussion last year, Alexandra Coutts. She was saying that very much similar to what you're saying now, that a lot of little small ones might even have a worse effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. We need to just protect bodies more, and everyone loves playing these sports. We know they do. And we can't take it away from them, but we have to try and find the best way to protect players and athletes that are playing the game they love.
Yeah. Paul, just asking you about NRL and the women's game. Have they been more susceptible to head knocks or concussions from I know we're talking about a limited number of games, but what's your observation of it?
Well, there wasn't a lot of talk about it when that season was on, but I was going to say about Cooter and Wade Graham, 15 minutes. Surely one of the highlights of the season was Cameron Munster being taken off with what's suspected was a head knock, acting like he was concussed, and then he rubs his shoulder when he'd been hit around the scone. So what we need is an independent assessment of these players, because, of course, the club doctor's going to say, Cameron Munster, you're our best player, get back out there. So it puts the club doctors in a very, very tough position because they have a conflict of duty. They want to get their players out there, but they also need to enforce these rules, some of which could be seen to be too restrictive on the players. And if it's not a severe head knock, then why are they being rested for so long? But it certainly needs, I think, to be an independent assessment. There needs to be on each sideline an independent club doctor who makes the assessment rather than the club doctors who are put in a tough position as to letting the players back out on the field.
You raise a good point. You actually do raise a good point there, Paul, around the independence, because I think the doctors will do the right things. The club doctors will do the right thing. But at the end of the day, to remove any uncertainty, why don't you have an independent doctor from the AFL perspective that has to sign off on anything to do with the head? And same with the NRL.
Well, that's right. Cameron Munster was showing clear signs of a head knock, and yet he gets off and comes to his senses enough to rub his shoulder, because that then meant he could get back on the field. And again, that's gamesmanship. But if there was a serious head knock there and he's rubbing it off, that could come back to haunt him later on. I don't want to jinx his future, but if it was a serious head knock, he should perhaps have been rested that game. But he comes on and he wins the game for the Storm. So there needs to be an independent assessment of head knocks if we're going to be serious about this issue in rugby league.
Cooter and Sarah, I'm just going to put to you, we've seen and we've just spoken about examples, particularly ACLs and leg injuries in women. Surely, rather than have a one-size-fits-all and looking at a concussion just broadly across people playing Australian rules football, we've got to look at how concussion is affecting AFLW players, and is it affecting, or are the incidences or instances of concussion greater in the AFLW game than AFL? One example that I can say off the top of my head is in the final game of the season, the match between Adelaide and Melbourne, where the two players ran into each other. It didn't appear as though it was a nasty clash at the time, but it left both players concussed, having to leave the field and also not taking part in their teams following, well, as far as Adelaide's concerned, their grand final match. What are your thoughts, Sarah and Kuta?
It's something that definitely needs to be considered. Men's and women's brains are very, very different, and it can be brought into all sorts of different circumstances. As in the last couple of years, whilst they've done more research into ACLs, there's been a strong focus on female bodies and how they're more susceptible to ACLs because of the Q zone and how their hips are aligned, the way the knees bend, and how their bodies are actually built and how this affects it. On a different note, even the research done into brains around autism, primarily forever since they've been doing research, all the research has been done on males and male brains, and they've only recently just started having a look at how people with autism or females with autism actually act and how their brains work, and it's a completely different thing. So it's why there's so many men diagnosed with autism instead of women who are diagnosed later in life, because they're comparing them to male brains. We need to have a look at comparing men with men and comparing women with women in terms of how their physiology works, and trying to make sure that we're taking the best care of them that we can. While there's, I'm sure, a lot of arguments out there that the women might not be able to have the same amount of access to resources, they're not generating enough revenue, we still have a duty of care, or the AFL and the AFLW have a duty of care to these girls to be able to put them aside from the men and do their own independent research into how best to benefit the women playing Australian football.
Kuta?
The clash you're talking about between, I think it was McNamara and maybe Rantel from Adelaide, I think it was, off the top of my head.
Yep.
That was a clash. Both girls went to footy and they both got concussed, subbed out of the game, and the like. Now, she couldn't play the grand final because it meant that it would have been inside the 12 days. Now, you had all the discussion. So the discussion didn't focus on the concussion. This discussion focused on the fact that she couldn't play the grand final because she had concussion. So why not have that pre-finals bye, pre-grand final bye now, like the NFL does? What should have happened was there should have been a focus on the concussion, and that wasn't done. The focus should have been on, one, the clash, two, the protocols out of it, and it was driven, at the end of the day, it was driven by the girl from Adelaide. Full credit to her, the way she spoke, presented. She did more for the game by not playing, but also then doing interviews around the concussion, around why she's not playing and why she shouldn't play. And I just thought that was a really important part that was missed. The discussion was around, she's not playing, she deserves to be playing. Now, that's not in doubt. The fact is she didn't play in the grand final because she had concussion. And the concussion is the issue that we're talking about that seems to be glossed over by the AFL and AFLW. And we can talk about the 18th man or the 23rd man, whatever the rule is that they've brought in for the AFL. It's now a medical sub. It's not just a HIA. It's not for concussion. It's actually an injury. So Trent Cotchin the other night does a hamstring with 3 minutes to go and is subbed out. How does that work? I just think that we need to do more work around heads, concussion, and making sure that the game is sustainable. I've been at under 11s this morning, football. Some wear helmets, some don't. It's not compulsory. I saw a couple of tackles and the umpire paid sling tackles, and they weren't sling tackles. So we're going from that perspective really mad around a sling tackle and a dangerous tackle, but then we're not prepared to go that extra yard around the concussion side of it. And I think it's genuinely a frustration around sport, to be honest.
Okay, Kuda, thanks for that. And thanks, Sarah. Important issue that I'm sure we'll keep an eye on in weeks to come. I'm going to make a statement, Kuda. The French Open should not proceed. Comment.
It certainly wouldn't be missed. I noticed Wimbledon came out this week and said that they're going to play, and that the Sunday is not going to be a lay day, which it used to be. So the Sunday used to be a day off, and they used to be able to have their G&Ts and everything like that, and strawberries and cream. But the French Open's a tournament that, apart from the French crowds and that, does anyone really care about it?
I was going to say, Cooter is our tennis expert. Can I get your thoughts on Nick Kyrgios being compared to Bernard Tomic? And he called it disgusting. I know, but he's never had his 4 speeding fines in one day. Like Bernie Tomic, that's got to be his highlight of his career reel there, Bernie Tomic, the 4 fines in a yellow Lambo in one day, surely.
Yeah, Nick didn't take that too well, did he?
Well, he said the police were rude when they came on his 4th speeding fine, Bernie Tomic. I don't know. Lucky he wasn't tasered. He would have been in America, probably locked up.
Well, he wouldn't have been able to do his OnlyFans for a couple of weeks. But anyway,
and she might have had to wash her own hair as well, the girlfriend. So,
no, I don't, Professor. At the end of the day, if the French Open goes ahead, it goes ahead. But does anyone really like? Maybe we're so far away, and you'll probably now discuss the Olympics.
Well,
they're gone, the Olympics.
Yeah, I'm heading there. But what I was going to say, Kuda, was that France is in a worse position than Australia was to run the Open. Now, we know how much, well, we don't know how much money the Australian Open lost, but if Tennis Australia are taking a loan from somewhere between 50 and 70 million, you would think that the losses might be somewhere in that, and also use their reserves, and it would be more than that. France is currently under a lockdown from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. Non-essential shops are closed and there's no travel outside 10 kilometres. Certainly there'd be no attendance at sports stadia at the moment. The French Open is slated to be played from the 23rd of May until the 6th of June. A lot of these restrictions won't be lifted until either during the French Open or after the French Open. It just doesn't seem to make sense, does it?
Well, Professor, at the end of the day, and we've talked about it enough times, money talks, doesn't it? Money talks. And the French, well, we know what the French are like. They're well known as the worst crowd ever to play tennis in front of. Yeah. Does it go ahead? Yes, it will. Do we really care? Well, we probably, I shouldn't say we don't care, because we're going to have the world number 1 playing, and her run at the moment, she's white hot, Ash. So we might have a Grand Slam. We might have another Grand Slam winner on our hands. French Open. Just
on Paul's point, lucky that Bernie Tomic didn't win the Stuttgart Open, because Barty won it during the week and her prize was a Porsche. So lucky Bernie Tomic didn't win that one.
Well, yeah, Bernard, I'm not sure he's winning too many matches, Bernie. He's playing round 1, or he's playing qualifiers, or whatever he's doing. So, well, at the end of the day, he's playing tennis, and hopefully it's giving him what he wants in life. Just on Paul's point, Kuda, do you think that Nick Kyrgios got a bit too upset, or was he justified in not being happy about being compared to
Well, I just got to say, I like that Kyrgios, the first thing he said is, does he have a foundation? Like, that makes you Dick Smith all of a sudden, or Florence Nightingale, because he set up a foundation out of probably 1% of what he's earned. That makes you apparently an upstanding moral citizen. But anyway, I don't know what the Bernie Tomic Foundation, what they're up to. or whether they exist, obviously not.
And of course, who runs the Nick Kyrgios Foundation, or who's one of the, is his brother Christos. So
Krista, there we go.
yeah. But yeah, I'm not sure that's the way to go. Is that I've got a foundation? Like, we see what you do with it, Nick, and that's fantastic.
Well, you used to be
mate.
a dickhead, and now you're not. But still, we're still the jury's still out on you. That's what I'd say about Kyrgios.
But yeah, at the end of the day, the French Open, like last year, it was played in November. Off the top of my head, it was played in November. This year, they're playing it in May, the normal timeline with the lead-up tournaments. No crowds makes for a pretty, I would have thought, a very dull and lackluster tournament.
Just like it always is.
Yeah, it's not one of the tournaments you actually stay up to watch, like Wimbledon or obviously the Australian Open we're biased with. But yeah, you don't stay up to watch the French Open and watch Nadal play matches. He's a genius on the clay, and he's a warrior. I'm not sure how Nadal will be later in life when he's 40, retired and unable to walk because he's run so many kilometres and he plays such a different style to everyone else.
Well, perhaps we get our Sportsfan Radio tennis guest, Brett Phillips, back on to talk to us about what his thoughts on the French Open are.
Yeah, and the thing, and full credit to Brett and his show, they're heavily invested into tennis in Australia and keeping tennis in the limelight, both social media wise and showing the players that may not be number one or number two in Australia, but those that are doing the hard yards on satellite tournaments and lead-in tournaments and all these sorts of tournaments that we all know about. But a lot of people don't know that tennis and golf and these sports aren't as sexy as what it looks for the mainstream players or the top 100.
Yeah. All right. Final topic for today's show, and what I can say is this, Paul Dalligan, it might be the NFL draft, but by crikey, Aaron Rodgers has got a great way of stealing the show.
Well, you're a Packers fan. I'd like to know your thoughts. When you're running the show and then they go and sign your heir apparent, when what you actually want is some help in the troops in the trenches, no wonder Rodgers has got to be in the bonnet. It's a lot like, I think, the way the Rabbitohs are treating Adam Reynolds. If you want to segue, you've got Napoleon there. Don't just give him one battle to fight. You've got to tell him, we're going to fight the war with you, Napoleon. So the way that they've treated Rodgers, you don't sign Napoleon Jr. And that's what they did when they signed. What's his name? He sounds like a porn star, rap star, Jordan Love or something like that. What's his name?
Jordan Love.
Jordan Love, give me strength. I mean, you've got Aaron Rodgers there running the army, and you sign a bloke called Jordan Love as the next heir apparent. So no wonder Rodgers wants out. If you didn't have a giant ego, you wouldn't be a gun quarterback. There's not a quarterback in the NFL who doesn't have an ego that's bigger than Texas. So no wonder Rodgers is a little bit annoyed about the way he's been treated, because, Professor, could he have put in more with the troops you've got there at the Packers? Could he have done more with the team you've got, and perhaps with the coaching limitations you've had? No wonder he's annoyed.
Well, perhaps he couldn't, Paul, but you'd be interested that Aaron Rodgers has asked Green Bay to trade him either to the 49ers, which is probably out because they play in their division, Las Vegas, or your Denver Broncos.
Well, that's interesting because the Broncos signed Teddy Bridgewater, but he's no Aaron Rodgers. And I know that Rodgers grew up as a 49ers fan, so it might be that he's headed that way. But when a player says, I'm not coming in, it's very hard to force him in there, either emotionally or physically. So your days of having Aaron Rodgers under centre, I think, are over, Professor. So get on Jordan Love, whoever he is.
Now, Paul, I'll stick on this. You've got a 38-year-old quarterback who's in career form. It would cost Denver probably 3 first-round draft choices. Would you make that trade?
Probably not with this Jordan Love is any good. You'd probably play hardball if you're running the Denver Broncos and say to them that, it's not really in our interest to offer the house for this guy just for a couple of years of success, because Rodgers does have a timeline, unless he's Tom Brady. He's got a timeline and an end date. So it is high stakes poker, and we'll have to see what happens. But I hope this bloke that the Jaguars have signed, who looks like Jesus and is being described as Jesus, I hope he's as good as what they're saying, Professor, because my word, I've never heard so much carry on about a first round pick.
First round picks always have carry on, but quarterbacks seem to raise the amount of carry on. Trevor Lawrence, you're talking about. He can't be the saviour. You can't put it all on him. Otherwise, he'll be a failure and a bust, just like plenty of others.
Well, I tell you, the steal of the draft is Mac Jones, I think his name was. Bill Belichick has got the Ned Kelly action and the balaclava on, because he's managed to do it again, Bill Belichick. This guy who's going to the Patriots apparently is the best of the bunch, and somehow he's dropped it. What was it, pick 14 or something or other? So the Patriots have done it again.
Yeah, quarterbacks in the first three choices. Cooter, did you follow the NFL draft at all?
I did follow the NFL draft. It went for 2 days, didn't it? The first round went for 10 hours, I think. You've never seen anything like it, and hence why Hutchie's trying to do the same thing for the AFL. But no, I did watch parts of it and saw the picks and that. And the Philadelphia Eagles took a wide receiver to complement Jalen Hurts. And again, I think Alabama, did they have 6 in the top 20 or something?
Yeah, something very similar, Cooter.
Just
something
on
amazing.
Whether the AFL can match the NFL draft, you reckon you're going to cross to a house in Colac and everyone's going to be going nuts? You reckon, and all the streamers and balloons coming out? I don't think they'll ever match it with this. Sign some 17-year-old from Colac and everyone's going nuts. I don't say that's compelling viewing, with all respect to the AFL draft. Come on.
Oh, it's not, is it? But again, though, we're selling in different markets, and
Yeah.
we've discussed before is why do we need to copy everything that America does?
Yeah,
we don't, and but it's amazing though, isn't it, that that the previews of these players and all the work that goes into them, and like they have trial days and the like, whereas with the AFL, they have matches. They play in a different league, and that's all you get. You don't actually get to watch them do a trial day at a college or anything like that. But it's a fair circus. There's a lot of money involved, and live trade. And the other thing with them, Professor, was that there's live pick trading on the night. Again, something that the AFL's copied, it's a long drawn out affair, and yeah, what do you say? It's American sport.
Yeah, it is.
I will say this. So one thing I do love about NFL, which I love almost as much as NRL, is you can sign a top player and you can go from a very average team to a top team just with that one pick. So I don't know if that can happen too easily in NRL or AFL. And that's what I love about it. You can get someone and suddenly you're good.
Yeah, well, if we talk about the entire
Trevor Lawrence.
draft, if we talk about the entire draft, of course, the number 259th pick and has the name of Mr. Irrelevant, the last and final pick in the draft this year was Grant Stuart, who was drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a linebacker from the University of Houston. There's not many of the people who were picked last in the draft have ever made anything of themselves. So at least he's got one title to look forward to.
I was going to say, given we don't have Gilding here, not much punting talk, can we talk about, was there any Aussie punters selected there, punting of the kicking sense, Professor? I haven't looked into that. Aussie punters into the draft. Any taken?
No, I'll come back to you with that next week. I see the first pick for the Broncos. They drafted a cornerback, Patrick Surtain from Alabama.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. So we'll see what happens there. But no gelding today. All I can say is the punt for the listeners is back Matt Duffy to score today. It's a special.
All right. Well, yes, gelding, I asked for some tips, but unfortunately he couldn't be on the show, and he also didn't provide the usual tips, although I must say that the professor and the gelding did pretty well yesterday at Sandown from 4 tips, 2 winners and 2 seconds. Thanks very much. And a return of a $5 each way bet, a return of plus $25. So not bad.
I was going to say good for the wins. Otherwise, I would have said more seconds. You'd be a minute. No, that's good punting.
It is very good punting. Any more?
And I know Sarah's left, but the Melbourne AFLW had their awards on Friday evening, and they had joint winners in that, Professor. It was Tyler Hanks with Karen Paxman. And the third place, the mullet, and the third place getter was probably the best ruckman in the competition who couldn't get in the All-Australian team was Lauren Pearce. So pretty worthy top 3, I would have thought there.
Well, and what a great start to an AFLW career. Tyler Hanks winning the AFLW Rising Star Award in her first season, equal first in the best and fairest.
And the other thing that was announced the other night, Sportsfan Zone mixed in here was re-signed until 2023. So,
well, we'll have to get him back on and talk to him about that and congratulate him.
Absolutely, he's done a terrific job with that footy club from inception, and hopefully they can go one better next year. Now,
as with all awards that are made in the AFLW, Cooter, I'm going to ask you, the Melbourne Football Club Best and Fairest is the Keith Bluey Truscott Award.
Yes.
What is the AFLW Melbourne Football Club Award?
I don't think it's named. I don't think it's named off the top of my head. It's a question without notice you've given us, but I don't believe it's named.
Well, it'll have to be one. It'll be the person who did the most to. I would expect that Melbourne should award that to the person at Melbourne who did the most to ensure that they had an AFLW team to start with, and also who started off the matches with the Western Bulldogs.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully she's going to be the award's going to be named after her, the main medal. But there's got to be someone behind the scenes at the Melbourne Footy Club who's been heavily involved from day dot, doing the inception, the matches, and then all of a sudden, here we are with the league, and Melbourne and the Bulldogs have certainly been big drivers behind it.
Yeah. We seem to have lost the vision of Mr. Dalligan, which is rather unfortunate, but that's okay. He's obviously doing bigger and better things. Until next week, Cooter,
yep.
We'll be talking a bit of sport. And, there he's back.
I'm back.
Well, I think I know where he's been. He's had a couple of beers, so he needed to...
Nature called, perhaps.
Clean the... Yeah.
All right, gentlemen.
Hopefully, Professor Melbourne can get the job done in about 2 hours, and we'll be top of the ladder and 3 games of percentage inside the 8.
Yeah, that'll be very good. All right, a very good afternoon all.
See you, mate. Cheers.